Welcome to the afternoon panel called The Perspective of the Others. This will be in English, despite the title being in German, because we are very happy to have guests here who speak English, and that's the language we'll have in this discussion. We want to have a look at the perspective of the others, the perspectives of other journalists working in what has been dubbed the Global South, among other places, and to discuss with them how they would describe their roles as foreign correspondents in a fastly changing world, in a world which has more poles than during the Cold War, in a multipolar world, and this is what the discussion is going to be about. I'm very glad to have three distinguished journalists with us here on the panel this afternoon. First of all, Gesine Dornblüth. She is a radio journalist and book author covering Russia and the former Soviet Union republics. She was based in Moscow for Deutschlandfunk from 2012 to 2017, but has covered the region since the early 90s. And in September, together with Thomas Franke, will bring out her new book, Putin's Gift, which in English doesn't mean Putin's present, but Putin's poison. Thank you for being with us, Gesine. To her left is Lee Mviti. He's editor-in-chief of Africa Check, based in Johannesburg. And we've had a panel on fact-checking just behind us now. Lee will put in more perspectives. He's having a lot of close looks on what social media in Nigeria, in Senegal, South Africa, and Kenya do. Welcome here. Last but not least, Nimish Sawant, freelance correspondent based in Berlin since 2021, having arrived here from Mumbai, where he was economic reporter for The Hindu, and The Hindu is one of the... I'm reporting for it now. I was going to finish. You were, back then you were reporting for somebody else. Okay, so he's reporting for The Hindu here, but has a long career in journalism in Mumbai, and is also writing for or reporting for German media outlets about the situation in India. So this is a double perspective, I think, which is going to enrich our discussion. We have a good hour, and the first 45 minutes, I'd say, it's me asking the questions, and then we'll open the floor for you to jump in to get more perspectives into this discussion. My first question goes out to you, Gesine. Russia and Ukraine, of course, have been in the media a whole lot in the last 2 years for reasons we all know. With you covering the region for so many years and decades, do you have the feeling that the coverage has become more nuanced since Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago? And are the interests behind this war on both sides of it explained well enough in German media?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, one remark: I think I'm announced as a journalist from Deutschlandfunk, which is partly true because I'm working most of all for Deutschlandfunk, but I'm freelancing, so everything I say here is my own opinion, and I'm not presenting Deutschlandfunk here. This is important. And as I said, I'm working mostly for Deutschlandfunk, so yes, it has improved since 24th of February 2022, because Deutschlandfunk set up a competence team, a Ukraine team, which at the beginning consisted of 6 current correspondents and former correspondents, including myself. We all know the languages, or at least Russian language. We are able to read local news and therefore be very fast. We know the context, and this is a very big plus. But I must also say that I think the German reporting on Eastern Europe was not too bad until 2022. The problem was that it was not listened to and it had no consequences. Or it had opposite consequences. For example, when I was a correspondent for Deutschlandfunk in Moscow, there was a gathering of business people, German business people invited German correspondents for a cup of tea, and then we were told that we should report on Russia more positively because otherwise it's bad for the business. So this is only one example on how we reported and what was the effect. Back to the question, what has changed since 2002? One very obvious thing is that more outlets started having their correspondence on a permanent basis in Kiev, which is good because before it was part of the problem that correspondents from Moscow covered all the region and had, of course, a kind of glasses, Russian glasses, if they reported on Ukraine, on South Caucasus, on Central Asia, and so on. And this is good, but we have the main problem at the current time is that it's becoming more and more complicated to report about Russia because it's simply dangerous. The correspondents who are still based in Moscow, they are really, I think, in danger. And there are only those ones who do not directly cover the war because this is not possible because it's even not allowed to call the war a war. You have to talk about the special military operation. And this has nothing to do with journalism. So it's very difficult for the colleagues who are now in Moscow. And also there is really physical danger because, as you all know, the colleague Gershkovich, who was sentenced, not yet, yes, he was sentenced already, and jailed because of alleged espionage, although he was simply doing his job. I called it that Russia is simply taking hostages in order to exchange them to people Russia wants to get back from jails in Western societies. And we have in German the very prominent figure of the killer from the Kleiner Tiergarten, the Tiergarten killer who shot down a Georgian citizen who was active in Chechnya a long time ago. And the court said this was state terrorism, and Putin already said that he wants to get this man back to Russia. So it's very important, and I mean, we are all here journalists who call themselves foreign correspondents, and it's so important, we all know this, and this is our very essence of our job and our unique selling point, so to say, that we are in the region. And now I am, for example, in the bad situation that I can't travel to Russia, and all the Russian independent colleagues are in the same situation. They share this difficult position. They are also mostly in the European Union, but they somehow manage to get news and also reportages and footage from Russia, and also to get it back into the society. But this is an extra story. I can talk about this later if there will be time. Thanks.
Thank you. Lee, jumping from Russia to South Africa, you're checking facts from media and social media from 4 different countries. Maybe jump in and describe a bit what this means in your daily work.
All right, thank you, Marcus, and hello to everyone. So we are a fact-checking organization that has been in existence for about 10 years now. Fact-checking generally is a very young industry, if I may call it as such. I think the oldest organizations from the US are about, give or take, 15 years now. And so we focus on identifying problematic claims in the media and in public debate, and those made by politicians, and then we assess them for the potential harm to society. If we do not fact check this, what harm would society be exposed to? And so we work in 4 African countries. In South Africa, where I am based, we are based at a university, at Wits University. And then we also have physical offices in Nigeria, in Kenya, and in Senegal. But we also nurture a network of about 50 fact-checking organizations around the continent. So pretty much we have a sense of what's happening in most of those countries when it comes to false narratives and false information. So it's not the easiest of jobs. So many languages, 55 countries. And there's a tendency to generalize a lot, and I get asked about questions about what's happening in Africa, and we have to say, okay, which part of Africa first, right? And then, Ethiopia, for example, where in Ethiopia? Because there's hundreds of communities in Ethiopia, so you have to figure out what the question really is trying to assess, right? But in terms of what we are then exposed to when it comes to developments in Europe and the US, the global north, if I may call it as such, there's very few fact-checking organizations or even African media organizations that have presence in Europe or in the US for historical reasons of economic sustainability. We tend to take a lot of our coverage as is reported by news agencies, by international media organizations, right? And you have to remember that news then is a craft, it's a cultural product, if I may say so, and it reflects the news values and priorities of those organizations that are reporting. So there's that one strand that we will take what is reported of Europe, of the US as is, again, and that includes the values that are embedded in that reportage. But also we are then seeing, instead of just taking the product wholesale, there's a lot of, I would call it, specialization. You say, okay, this is what is happening in Europe, US. How does it affect the country I am in? How does it affect South Africa? There's a lot of changing EU policy around trade. How does it affect exports of South Africa to the European Union, for example? Or if it's Kenya, then we see the issues of terrorism, or again, the issues of migration when it comes to Nigeria. If we see the walls going up here in Europe, then how is it going to affect the big migration, the big question of migration that a lot of African countries are grappling with, right? So we've seen one taking news coverage of the US as is, of Europe as is, but also then a lot of African media then take that and apply it to their, their immediate context, so as to see what developments elsewhere mean for Africa's relationship with other countries and other regions.
Maybe a follow-up, how precise is the coverage of Europe or the US in media in the different countries that you follow up closely? Is it precise, or do you discover false narratives or disinformation there too about the global north?
So first, since we are taking the news wholesale, if you report on it falsely, then we will report on what you reported, right? But also there's a lot of false narratives that we have seen in recent years, and those then have tended to color the debate around how information flows between Africa and Europe, for example. I could give a few examples. We see false narratives around historical relations between Africa and the global north. And when I say the global north, I mean the EU and the US, right? These issues of colonialism, both past colonialism and how it colors debates in a political context right now, and also these issues of neo-colonialism, where there's a sense that, Europe, for example, let me use Europe since we're in Europe, is using a lot of tools to exert pressure on Africa, right? Whether it's trade, whether it's migration, whether it's aid, right? So we see a lot of false narratives around historical issues. We see a lot of narratives around the health. We saw the pandemic. There was a lot of concern about how Western medicine is being used to affect a lot of African countries negatively. We see a lot of false narratives around the environment, climate change now, and how European countries got ahead, by depending on fossil fuels, and now they do not want African countries to benefit the same way. We see a lot of political false narratives around how European countries are only extracting resources from Africa and not investing in the communities, or at least giving back fair value for what they get, right? So spans a lot of areas, and it colors the relations between Africa and Europe in a lot of negative ways, because then it hinders cooperation between on issues that matter to the world, whether it's trade or whether it's, for example, security or even climate change. So a lot of false narratives definitely are coloring relations between Africa and the US. And the EU, even the US anyway, since we're speaking of the global north.
Thank you. Lee, if you followed the German media in the last few days, you would imagine that India is full of millionaires doing week-long weddings.
Yeah.
Would you agree that this is what your country is about?
No. But yeah, in the last 3-4 days, that has been the major news in India and also in the German news websites and on the radio. Yeah.
But beside that special example, do you have the feeling that German media, or if you follow European media of the global north, if you will, do cover India in an appropriate manner, or what would the deficits be?
Well, I've been in Germany since 21, and I would say not really. When there are like big political events, so for instance, when the Prime Minister Modi is visiting Germany or when Scholz visits India, there is a spike in India-related coverage in the German media, but or even big events like the Indian national elections that just got over. There was a lot of excellent analyses and reportage in the German media, but after that big event, there's not been much coverage about India. And also when it comes to economic stories, I think China gets a lot more scrutiny in Germany than India, which makes sense because the German-China trade is much, much more than German-India trade. But, I would just give an example. Like last year, the Volker Wissing visited India, and he did like a mobile phone payment with a vegetable vendor, and that was like a big news in Germany. And, and I was like, we have been doing that since 2017. But if I had pitched that story in 2017 to a German publication, they would not really be interested because, there's no interest in that. I mean, I also see there's a lot of stories in German media about India. They focus a lot still on, things like income inequality or disasters happening in India or yoga or Ayurveda. Not that there's anything wrong with these stories, but I would also like to see the same kind of weightage given to stories such as, like the vibrant startup scene in India, for instance, or when it comes to digitalization, how far ahead India is as compared to Germany, or, even something like India's space program. So, if there were a good balance of these stories, that would have been nice. But I also feel it's got a lot to do with, the way the business models of media and also how journalists are spread out. Like in India, for instance, Deutsche Welle is the only, I feel, organization that has like a very dedicated bureau with a lot of people on the ground, and so they get a lot of in-depth, nuanced stories from India. And apart from, there are like a handful of German journalists who are in India and reporting from India. And I have a lot of respect for them because India is not an easy country to report from. But I've seen that a lot of media houses in Germany will have some editor or correspondent located somewhere in Tokyo or Beijing or Singapore or what have you. But they're also expected to do stories about India, So I find that a bit amusing. Like, how can someone sitting in some remote corner report about India? And of course, then you don't get like a nuanced perspective of such a large country because it is a complicated country, even for reporters from India. And I think the other shortcoming, I would say, I find is there is not a lot of exchange of journalist exchange between India and Germany. So for instance, I was part of a journalist exchange program by the Robert Bosch Stiftung where I was in Berlin for 3 months and reported stories on Berlin for Indian publications. And similarly, a lot of German journalists were in India and they reported about India. So what you had in the 5 years that that program ran was 40 mid-career journalists doing really nuanced stories and depth stories which go beyond the surface level narratives about India. And there are very few, programs like that anymore. So I think that's also, I would say, a reason why India is not seen so much in the German media sector. And then it doesn't help when, some prestigious media organizations in Germany reiterate the stereotypes of India. Like, to give an example, last year, when India's population crossed that of China, Der Spiegel, which is a very, very well-respected German magazine, had a cartoon which showed China as a bullet train and India as a steam engine with a lot of people all around it with the India flag, as though there are no other ways to depict the economic prosperity of India. So these kind of stereotypical narratives also do not help in a media ecosystem where there is already a little Indian coverage is not so vast, and yeah, sometimes like when I've tried to pitch stories about India to German publications, I've also heard that, we have just done a story on India like a month ago, even though it's a whole different topic than I'm covering, but then it feels like there is a certain set of quota of India stories that that are supposed to be done, and if they are complete, then you have to wait till the next quota is available. So I think there's definitely a huge scope of doing more stories about India, especially now when you look at the geopolitics and how India is considered a strategically important country. When you hear talks about de-risking from China, but that is not reflected in the German media sector, I would say. Yeah.
A follow-up here too, since you write for The Hindu in India, do you experience similar agenda setting that they say we've just had something on the German elections, please leave us alone with subjects from Germany?
Yeah. Well, in India, it's like unlike in Germany where you have like very good resources or financial resources. The India, I would say 95% of coverage of Germany or Europe is mostly syndicated via agencies. There's maybe one TV channel which does dedicated news about international politics and all. So I would say in India also, like the stress is more on the local news than on India. I am like grateful that I am allowed, because I'm based in Germany, I'm allowed, I can do stories about German politics and European politics for an Indian newspaper, but there are very few editors like that. So I think in India, unless the business models change about media, unless there is an interest in Europe or Germany, I think the majority will still rely on the news that you get from the wires.
Thank you. We are discussing the roles that foreign correspondents should play, how they see themselves. So I'd like to ask an open question to all three of you. Should foreign correspondents be advocates of the country or region they live in? Maybe start with you, Gesine.
I think absolutely they should not, because the very task of journalism is to be advocates of the truth. It may sound a bit old-fashioned and pathetic, but that's it. And it reminds me a bit of my time when I wrote my PhD in Russian literature. I was also asked, should you love the person or the literature you write about? And it's absolutely not necessary, and with journalism it's the same. Of course, it's often a question also from people who like Putin. They say to me that I hate Russia, I don't like it, but this is not the categories. So I think that we journalists, we need some sympathy, but not to a special region. Of course, to the region it helps, but general, I think sympathy and openness towards people and towards those people we report about is absolutely necessary. And of course, we need to be advocates of developments in a certain region, because therefore we are specialists, we are specialized in. And for example, now, if I take Russia as an example, I would not say that I'm an advocate of the regime. Of course, I'm not. I'm not an advocate of the population, but it's very important to distinguish and to know and to analyze the real situation. It's a very complicated topic, to what extent people in Russia support the war and the war of aggression and so on. And so you have to simply to understand and to tell the people, but this has nothing to do with advocacy. And even I would say I would be more, who if we come back to this topic, if I would love Russia or be in favor of Russia, then I would be in favor of those who are now abroad and in exile.
Thank you. Lee, how do you see your role, which is not exactly that of a foreign correspondent, but if you take that as a, given is advocacy the right word you would use?
It struck me how Gesine was absolutely not from the word go. I think there needs to be a balance, right? And I'm looking at it from the perspective of the Global South. First, there is, obviously, you want to report to be credible, not to be seen as biased. And that's why you have to balance your advocacy role when reporting. But from the viewpoint of someone who lives in Africa, I think there's a lot of stories that are not given exposure to wider audiences. And there's a lot of stories of innovation, of technology, of resilience, of local populations coming up with solutions to challenges, or having agency in changing the immediate, environment, whether it's, working to reduce poverty, right? And I think for foreign correspondents, then you are better able to tell these stories when you are almost embedded, you're an advocate for communities really beating the odds, right? And for you to give proper context, for you to go deep, right? Then you need to be an advocate for communities, for disadvantaged populations, and so that's where I say you need to feel that passion to be an advocate of growth, of development, as you mentioned. But there needs to be just a slight balance so that you then are not seen to be biased and you affect how people perceive you or your organization. But I would say, from my perspective, there needs to be advocates for communities really uplifting themselves, and yeah, there's a way you can report that, and it comes through, that this correspondence really is invested in this community and in this country, and seeing, misconceptions and narratives changing, so you can tell, who is just reporting and who really is advocating for success to, stories from Africa.
So it's a thin line to becoming an activist, or where's the distinction?
I would not use the word activist. I've avoided it very studiously. Just a strong advocate. I think once you go into activism, you might as well then leave, journalism and go in the streets and, do what you need to do, the placards and hug a tree or something. So I think activism, not per se, but, strong advocates of growth and development.
Do you relate to that, Nimish?
Yes, I would relate to what he's saying. Like, I don't want to be an activist level when I'm reporting about India, but of course, if I see that, okay, this is a story that would be relevant to a German audience, then yeah, I would advocate for that story to be, okay, this is a story that needs to be told in that context. So similarly, with when I'm reporting about Germany to India, I don't bombard my editor with stories that, just because I am in Germany, I have to, say good things about the country and do the stories. But yeah, wherever relevant, where you think that, okay, this has an impact in both the countries, yeah, sure, why not?
I'd like to pick up another aspect of working, especially as freelance foreign correspondents. How limiting are the financial resources for you in your work, be it in Russia, be it in other former Soviet republics, to cover all the ambiguities and nuances that these big countries and large regions bring with it? Maybe you have examples or experience. I'll go again with you, Gesine, and make the round.
Yeah, maybe I can compare a bit, because I worked as a staff editor, as a staff correspondent in Moscow, and but before and again now I am a freelancer, and of course it makes a difference. My former boss from this time is in the room, so it was a lot easier. It was not a matter of, I think I did not spend too much money during my trip, so this was not, I got used to look on the money from my many years as a freelancer, so I think it was also a plus. But nevertheless, for example, during this time I spent, I think 3 weeks or so on a trip to the very far east, and this is something I could not have done as a freelancer, absolutely. And another thing is, for example, Central Asia, which is a very interesting and underreported region. And of course, it was easier during my 5 years as a correspondent. I traveled to almost not to Turkmenistan, and to Uzbekistan was also not possible, but to the other 3 countries, and it's expensive. And as a freelancer, then you have to calculate, and the interest in German media and radio to Central Asia is much smaller than to South Caucasus. So this is also the reason why I decided as a freelancer to specialize in South Caucasus and not in Central Asia, because it's a matter of money.
How about your work? Is that a question also of financial resources? I think in Germany, this "you are from Africa" is a sort of description of not differentiating at all about all the different countries there is. So you, I think, mentioned that you have 50 different entities in your network. How important is it to be at all these different places?
Obviously, it helps with the context, because no one country is the same. But also, fact-checking in its current format is very, very dependent on donor funding, right? And so we have all the big foundations that sink money into fact-checking. But we've also seen a trend where a lot of the organizations, they're about, give or take, globally, 400 fact-checking organizations. Most of them, as I said, have only come up in the last 10 years. And a lot of them are very, very dependent on platforms, right? So you are Meta, you are Google, and Meta's and all its products. And that means, okay, so you get a contract to fact check on those platforms, and it's only renewed, give or take, every year. So you cannot even plan for doing impactful work long term. But that dependence also means you cannot really call these platforms out, for being conduits of disinformation or for false narratives. So the push really is to diversify sources of funding for fact-checking, and there's a big debate as to how effective it is in its current format, because we are saying it's not enough to debunk, to fact-check, because the truth or facts do not travel as quickly as the initial false information, right? So then you want to, invest in long-term alternatives, which really is about media literacy, it's about digital literacy, misinformation literacy, where you are looking to train communities, to train children to critically engage the information they consume wherever they find it in the world. And that work needs a lot of money, and that money is not forthcoming. But there's lots of conversations around how you can make fact-checking sustainable and win it off the current big foundations, the big platforms that are funding it at the moment, so that you can really go into the communities where no one is asking you, okay, so I gave you this amount of money, what did you achieve? And you say, I changed the narrative around this community, but okay, but what does it mean for me as a platform? Where is my return on investment? So still very dependent on people who write checks, but I think for us to really empower communities with factual information, then we have to find new sources of funding. And that's a headache that keeps us awake all night.
Are you able to do the stories you want to do with the paper paying you for trips, I don't know, to different parts of Germany where you normally wouldn't go to?
No. It's, thankfully, like a lot of the stories, I write in English because it's an English language newspaper. So most of my work is in English, but yeah, of course, there are some times when if I have to go on the ground and speak to people, I have to speak in German. My German is not fluent, and of course my wife helps me out sometimes when I have some issues with that. But no, there is no separate budget to pay for a translator or something, so whatever money I get, I have to manage everything in that. And of course, that is sometimes restrictive. So for instance, if I want to cover a story which is happening outside of Berlin, I have to factor in how much money I will spend out of my own pocket, and then see if this works out for me budget-wise, because the amount of payment that I get per story is fixed. As a freelancer, I can't really negotiate for travel expenses or those kind of things. And yeah, that's a limiting factor, so I have to work within those constraints.
And did they, for example, ask you to cover the European elections without traveling to Brussels, or how would that work?
No, I wasn't given the mandate to cover the European elections, but I have done a story post the elections and what are the impacts and all. And no, if I have to travel to Brussels, it has to be on my tab. They are not going to finance that. But yeah, I guess that those are the constraints even journalists in India probably face. So I know a lot of German journalists who were covering the elections. They would have liked to have a higher budget to pay stringers or local reporters who know the local language and the local context, but they just didn't have enough budgets, and their stories, which could have been much more deeper if they had enough funds to pay off a local stringer, that wasn't happening. And I guess this is not just my case. This is just the state of journalism that we are in right now. There just aren't enough. There's just not enough budget to that can help you do the story the way you want to do. At the same time, make enough to sort of save. So it's a challenging profession, and it's just it's getting more challenging by the day.
Yes, and I think the story of Weltreporter is a story about exactly that 20 years ago, Weltreporter was founded. Globalization was not as heard of as it is today. Everybody was saying the world is getting more and more complex. We need more people to explain it, but staff correspondents were getting fewer and fewer. So yes, it's a global development. And tell me, how do you do advocacy in the offices, in the media outlets you work for, to convince them that more contextualization is needed, that these trips are needed to really give a picture of Russia or of Uzbekistan? What do you do? Do you do advocacy there too?
To be honest, I've been traveling not so much the last years, because last time I've been to Russia was December 2019. Then there was the pandemics, and they had a very restrictive regime, so it was not possible. And my next visa I had for February 2022, and I did not travel then. So, and then I was busy almost all the time with reporting within this Ukraine team. But I went to Ukraine this spring first because I simply said that it's not. Well, it's not honest and not professional to talk about Ukraine without going there. And also I felt that psychologically it's not easy to talk about all this cruel things without mental connection to the people and to the situation. So this was very important, and I'm planning the next trip very soon. And it's not difficult to convince, it's more than difficulties related to security issues. But in general, how to convince, well, offer good stories. You are all professionals. I don't need to tell you what makes journalism good and attractive. It's personal stories, it's reportages, it's relevance. So find the good stories to illustrate the big issues like summits and so on. So this is how it works. But if there are limits and there is no money, then there is no money. So then it's up to the editors to fight for a bigger budget.
How do you fight with your donors to give you more money?
I think there was a golden period for fact-checking, and this was in the wake of Trump's election back in 2016, and Brexit after that, right? And there was a lot of focus on just how false information played a role in those two events, and false information has generally tended to follow crises, elections, the pandemic. So there has been, or there was funding for fact-checking at the time. But that has, and I spoke to it, is dwindling because we've seen a lot of contestation for facts, right? Sometimes now facts depend on which side of the ideological divide you're looking at them, and there's been a fight for facts. So then means it's us fighting to not offend too many people. We used to be equal opportunity offenders when we fact-checking, but now you have to be aware of how this one side, whether it's a right, is affecting who is writing the checks, right? But in terms of reach, in terms of relationships, we've seen a lot of uptake of work by the media. We don't have to convince a lot of media organizations to publish what we do. There's an awareness. One, they do not have the resources that fact-checking has, but also it's symbiotic. Fact-checking came about because a lot of media organizations did just not have the resources to do fact-checking on their own, and so in a way they almost outsource that function to us. So it's symbiotic. We do the work, they give us the reach because they still have a lot of audiences. But yeah, the battle at the moment is to convince those who sign the checks of the long-term sustainability of what we do. And yeah, I did say it's not the easiest of things at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Nimish, how is it with you? Do you have successes in convincing your editors back home that maybe German-Indian economic ties are getting more important and you sell more stories than before?
Thanks to, I've got a very good editor back home who understands foreign affairs and all, and sometimes, he only tells me, okay, look at this aspect and all. But I would say it's like when I'm pitching stories, for instance, if I pitch something like, okay, I want to do a story on the rise of a new left-wing party in Germany and how that will have an impact in the German elections, versus if I pitch something like the EU-China trade war and how that opens opportunity for India, especially for German automobile makers, it's a no-brainer. The second story will get picked. So, so I have to, it's always a struggle to find a story which which I can report from here, but which can be of interest to an Indian audience, And in the last year, there have been many stories that have had ticked off these two aspects. But of course, there are some stories like, which are very, very important in Germany, which may have no India connect, but would be good. So in that case, I have to spend a lot more time in crafting a pitch so that my editor is, on the board and wants to publish that story. So yeah, it's always a fine balance to sort of, convince editors of stories. Because as it is, like I said, most of there are very few publications in India who have like on-roll foreign correspondents who are situated in Europe, and like most of the stories are taken from wires. So I think there has to be also in the Indian media sector a mindset change to see that, okay, there is a value in getting stories just beyond the bland wire copies that you get. And yeah, I'm just trying my little bit to sort of, change that. So yeah.
Since we're discussing these questions in the context of a multipolar world, in a new balance between the global north, or the democratic capitalist states, if you will, and the global south, do you think there's an ideological part to it, that they, in India, with your editors, they want to cover Europe less than they want to cover China, for example, or is this purely pragmatic professional reasons?
I think it's a large part has to do with just the business priorities of every publication. It's not like they don't want to hear news about Europe. Of course, when the Prime Minister visits Europe or Germany or any other country, there's a huge coverage on those stories. People in India are interested in, okay, what does some free trade agreement mean for India? Or, right now in Germany, there is a huge Fachkraftmangel. And in the last 2 years, the most number of work visas that Germany issued were for Indian professionals. So yes, there is an interest for Indian professionals to know, okay, is there an opportunity for them to move to Germany? So there is that interest. Like if you bring out the aspects where for an Indian reader they can extract some economic benefit, then of course there is an interest in stories around Europe. But I don't know, like more cultural stories from Europe, I don't know how much of an audience there is for that in India. I mean, of course, there are a lot of travel stories that you see in Indian publications about European destinations and all, but yeah, that's a whole other style of journalism. And like the core issues about the rise of right wing and all in Europe, or what does the EU election results mean for Germany going into 3 state elections? I don't think there is that much of a interest in India for that. And likewise, in Germany, I don't think they would be interested in state elections that are happening in India. So I think, yeah.
Does the fact that South Africa, as India and Russia, is part of the BRICS, which is sort of a representative of the global south, does that play a role in the coverage you have, or is that also rather ideological and not so important?
It certainly does. You have to remember a lot of African countries still have memories of the Cold War, when they were funneled or corralled into certain ideologies, and then there was the emergence of the non-aligned movement. And we then have seen a lot of African countries looking to, strike a balance, almost take the sit on the fence depending on their interests, right? We saw that, for example, with the issue of Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of there's a big push by the global north for a lot of African countries, for example, to condemn Russia. But again, for many African countries, Russia is a big supplier of energy, of fertilizer, right? So it's about, okay, so what are my interests at the moment? We supported certain sides during the Cold War, and it was to our detriment, then the ideologies now tend to be, okay, that is an issue for the EU, right? But how can I be sympathetic to both sides? Because if I have to choose sides, I'm looking for alternatives. I need to grow and develop, and some countries, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, Turkey, whoever, are giving me more alternatives on my development journey than I had before, right? So ideology does play a big role, but also it's grounded in history of the African continent and how it has had to navigate that space of international relations. So very much so, but almost like, okay, I'm going to ignore the ideology. My issues are about, I am hungry today, who is solving my issue today. It's not so much about the ideology of it, whether I am leftist or rightist or centrist or hard right, or it's who can I work with today to give me a platform to grow and develop. So not so much ideology, more of immediate everyday interests.
If I may add something, I think that what you mentioned is very important, because right now in the situation with Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, we see that we had not enough reporting on the situations in Africa, in South America, in Asia, because it's a confrontation of authoritarian regimes and democracies. And of course, the democracies try to convince those neutral countries who try to be neutral, convince them on the pro-democratic side. And in the context of the so-called Peace Summit in Switzerland, I would have loved to hear more about the position of those countries of the Global South beforehand, because I think there was some kind of naiveness and underestimation on how deep the dependence of those countries is on Russia. And so, it was a mistake. We had not enough reporting on those countries, and it's very important to understand those connections and also the amount of Russian propaganda and disinformation and soft power in those countries, in India also.
Yeah, to add to that, when this Russia-Ukraine war started, a lot of people were surprised as to why India is not taking a confrontational stand against Russia, and it's logical to ask that question. But then you also have to look at the history of India-Russia relations from the 60s onwards, to understand why that is. And I think that nuance was missing at the time in the Western reporting. And like Gesine said, the view of the Global South was not really given a prime position to make it evident as to why some countries are still not going completely against Russia. So I think if there is a sustained reporting or coverage with more nuance, these questions would be answered earlier.
Thank you for your nuanced reporting already and discussion. I would like to open the floor to your questions now.
I just wanted to give an example. So just to stick with the Russia-Ukraine issue. So it's been very clear who was the aggressor, right? So Russia invaded Ukraine, and those are the facts, right? But the position most African countries took was, okay, we can see who is on the wrong here, right? But it's about what benefits or what are my trade interests or political interests, right? And so we were approached by a Ukrainian organization called Genesis, right? They run the 3 most followed digital agencies in Kenya, in Nigeria, and in South Africa. They're very good at converting social media into clicks. And so they were like, we're seeing very little sympathy for our cause, even if we were the ones who attacked. Can we work with the organization so as to then, let the Ukrainian side also be heard, right? And as much as we know this is what the situation is, one country is the aggressor, we are like, this is tricky for us because then we will be seen as being pro-West, the US and the EU and the position it has taken. So much as we understand how you would want your story to get out, we also are aware of our own immediate audiences and how we'll be perceived. And for us, non-partisanship is key. So we could feel we would have loved to get their story out, but it was just very tricky terrain to work in.
Interesting. There's the first question. Please say your name and wait for the microphone to arrive.
My name is Gemma Pörzken. I'm a journalist here in Berlin, and I have a question to Lee. What about the Chinese influence of media? Because news agency Xinhua is nearly in every African country present, very different from the American or even from the German news agencies. And there are a lot of journalists, for example, from Kenya traveling for studies, journalistic studies to Beijing. And also, from what I heard, there's low pricing that's what a Kenyan journalist told me, that they have a very low price for the news agency Xinhua if they take it. So how do you see this influence of China?
Sometimes it's free. It's not even it's free content you're getting, and China has been very strategic in looking to change the narratives around culture and the media, right? Because it's also another arena for competition, and most of the focus has tended to be on the competition for the African space between the US and China, but the soft power element has been lost in it, and China has been very good at occupying that space. And it's not even just the media, it's a lot of things that China does that are not as reported. My own wife is headed to China in a couple of weeks. She works for a union, and they've done a lot of space in the union space, a lot of work in the union space in South Africa. And you can see how then, given the role of unions in South Africa, then you can see how then that percolates into just the issue of everyday, conversations. So I think very much underplayed what China has done, both legally and also disinformation campaigns to highlight the perceived negatives of the global north and position themselves as alternatives for African countries. So they've been very good at that, and probably has flown under the radar a bit.
Are there more questions? Please, here.
I have a question to Lee. For me, it's an issue, the link or the support by international NGOs, particularly to you and South Africa. There was some years ago, there was a conflict by local newsrooms in South Africa, financed and supported by George Soros. And the issue was, to shorten it, George Soros have special interests, particularly so-called quick regime change. And the newsrooms, they think about the future, and also that they improve the conditions and not so keen in real results. How you think in Africa, in other countries, with ambivalence of financed by foundations, international foundations like Soros, and the local newsrooms in Africa. In that case, it's also very complicated because the status of George Soros if you criticize him, you comes in the background of fake news or Russia and so on, and so how you manage it?
Soros is also one of our funders, by the way, right? I need to put that disclaimer there. So is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You put it this way, there is very little funding for South African media at the moment. And until that changes, and I'm not sure when it will, given what we're seeing with just the media space being laid to waste for funding, right? Then you probably will take funding from a lot of organizations that may be perceived or portrayed in a certain way here in the EU or the global north, but that does not land the same way, in Africa. Although you will find people who will pounce on that. We get criticized a lot for that, that Soros-funded organization, fact-checking organization. You then have to demonstrate with your work that their interests and do not supersede your own values. And it's very important to say, okay, I am funded by Soros. This is what they stand for, right? And this is where we are putting this funding into, right? A lot of organizations will not go for that funding because it's seen as, for example, being liberal or being, but again, there are organizations that need that funding to do important work. So it is a balance. There'll be a lot of conflict. It's a way to weaponize it against those publications you don't agree with. But it comes down to, at the end of the day, I need funding to run an organization, right? So what are my values and how do they align with this particular funder? The thing with a lot of African organizations is they don't nail their colors to their mast. They don't say I am conservative or I am so and so the way we see it done here, in the EU, the UK, the US. So it becomes, I need to do my job and what are my resources, and then how do I explain it to my readers? So you will find that, but at the end of the day, do I have my resources to run a newsroom, and how do my readers perceive me because of it, right? I don't know if that answers your question. If not, I can see you a year later, yes, and then you can have conflict together. All right. Yeah.
Because I have seen it as South Africa and see some examples, and so it's better.
Let's fight offline. No.
So we have an open question here.
Yes, Clemens Bomsdorf. I'm a former Nordic correspondent and used to be, I'm still a member of Weltreporter, but I was an active member based in Copenhagen and Stockholm. And I'm now heading the Central and Eastern European program of the International Journalist Programs. And what I can see is with both these jobs or former jobs in the Nordic region as well as Central and Eastern Europe, that my impression is that the interest for journalists and in particular freelancers is also diminishing. For example, I can see there are much less journalists now in the Nordic countries, also less people going there, just giving it a try. Also with our program, where we are funding journalists to stay in Central and Eastern Europe for like 6 to 8 weeks, and for being a foreign correspondent just for a brief period of time, the interest in that has been also going a little bit down. So my question is, maybe it's to all three or four of you on the panel, but is your impression as well that maybe the younger generation of journalists, they are a bit less interested in going abroad in the way as we used to do it? And what could be, if so, the reason for that? And then, of course, if there's any younger journalists in the room or even older ones actually, in the room who is interested in going to this region, Central Eastern European, then Europe, including Hungary, Czech Republic, and so on, then please approach me afterwards. Thanks.
You want to start?
Okay. Just to answer the question of, there's already, like I mentioned, there are budgetary constraints, and a lot of, like you said, a lot of German journalists are not going in these regions. So my question is, why not try and identify local journalists in these regions, maybe get them to Germany or wherever and train them, and then they can be someone you can collaborate with to do stories. That's another way out. And in terms of the standard of living, what a German organization might pay a German journalist to be in a foreign country, it could be much cheaper if you have like a local stringer or correspondent. Sorry. Yeah. Is that what you...
Yeah, maybe, I'm not sure if there's a misunderstanding. As I said, my impression is that there's less interest in journalists of going abroad. So I was wondering whether you agree, as I can see, like in the Nordic countries, when I started working there were like 5 to 10 freelancers working. And in Eastern Europe, when we started the program, we had like a lot of people being interested in going in the region. I mean, looking at Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, there's a lot of going on politically. Gesine mentioned how important it is to report about certain regions and to make heard what's happening there. So my impression, I wanted to know whether you would agree on that. Maybe even it's a bit that journalists have less impression of going, are less interested of going abroad, trying out or doing research abroad. Or maybe I'm wrong and it's just by chance, because also Corona changed a lot of things, that people maybe are used to different work styles and so on. But also Weltreporter can notice, as I know, to make my knowledge at least, that there are less people in certain regions, less German freelancer journalists in certain regions than there used to be 10 or 15 years ago. So basically, whether you agree on that impression and whether you think what could be the reason behind.
It's a tough question, because there is the danger of falling into this before everything was better. When I started traveling to Russia in the 90s, there was just, I would say, it's like a cliche, but it was really a window of opportunities, because nothing was known about everyday life in Soviet Union, and I went there and I had a partner then who also was very interested, and we went together and were a team and were freelancing and were basically we always combined job and vacation. So we never went on holidays without microphone for years, and there was we worked a lot simply. So, and I'm not sure, but this is I don't have kids, so I'm not sure I should say that, but sometimes I think that younger generation is not so ready to invest so much energy. We can talk about this offline later. And also, of course, the circumstances changed. And you mentioned the pandemics, but also there is less money. And I surely would not dare today to start a career as a freelance journalist on Eastern Europe. I myself would not do that. Now I'm a specialist and I have possibilities, but I would not have them if I were unknown now. And if there is interest or not, I think as a freelancer it's less. But on the other hand, we have brilliant young colleagues, for example, in Ukraine, in Israel, and in other countries as well. So I would not say that the younger generation is somehow less interested or bad or less professional or whatever.
Since we're running out of time, do you want to add something there? Otherwise, I'd give the last two questions a chance.
Probably I'm the least qualified to answer that question, but I could say I've seen a lot of interest in the EU in our work. We get a lot of requests, to participate in all manner of research, to have people come, and be embedded with us. So our experience is different from what you're seeing. There's a lot of interest in a lot of work. In our work, maybe a lot of young Germans or young Europeans are more socially aware, and they want to report on the underreported stories that the Global South has, right? The other way, I think, we then have a lot of African journalists who then again probably would like to understand how the policy that affects so many African countries is made here in the EU, and then there's the whole hurdle that you have to jump off getting here, right? I've been giving the story of how I was detained in Schiphol yesterday myself, right? Queuing there, and this gentleman is like, where are you off to? I'm like, I'm going to Berlin. What are you going to do in Berlin? I'm like, I'm going to speak to a room of very clever people. Which clever people, right? I'm like, a lot of clever people were in the media. So he wasn't too happy with my explanation. And so he shunted me to the immigration office just next door, and I cooled my heels there for 20 minutes, right? And then I'm like, okay, I think I'll miss my flight, so why am I here, right? And so I asked them, okay, have you figured if you want to let me go where I'm going? And they're like, okay, let me see your papers. I'm like, but you gave me the Schengen visa, right? You'd have known what I'm going to do there. If you aren't satisfied, you'd have denied me that visa, right? And so they looked at it, they're like, actually, his papers are in order, right? Now, this is me who considers myself a bit well-traveled. I've done 31 countries in my life at the moment, right? So imagine anyone else who has that interest, and can't get here to understand how, how the world really works, how we are interrelated. So there's a lot of interest from the EU in Africa. Same, it's not as easy, much as we wish we could, exchange those ideas as to how to make the profession better.
Thanks for sharing that with us. One last question, two last questions, or is it only you? Go ahead, please.
Hello, my name is Amit Deshmukh. I quit my reporting job in 2014. Now I running my media PR and government relation, public policy, and many things. I also lived 8 years in China. My direct questions to all the panelists. Now we are living in AI, social media boosting, now social media trolling, everything going on. Every year, same news coming on social media and trolled by someone. Recently, example of India about Lok Sabha speaker daughter. I just give one single example. This news was 21. So it's time for real ground reporting, or it's time for endorsement reporting? What is your view about everyone? Because due to social media boosting, we have parallelly one business, marketing department in our social media, reporting killing by many organizations. So my direct question is, it's time for real ground reporting? Yeah, we are going for endorsement reportings in coming future in everywhere in this world.
I could ask a follow-up question by what you mean by endorsement reporting.
Endorsement reporting, we don't know this reporting written by reporters, organization, brand team, marketing team. For viewers, readers, we feel this is real, but this is some kind of intentions everywhere in this world, because I'm doing research on this field. So I saw everywhere, almost all branded, everywhere in this world.
Probably the question there is, what can you outsource to technology or to make your work easier, right? And you mentioned it at the start, there's a lot of AI and what it means for real world reporting. And probably I can speak to how we've approached it as a fact-checking organization. We have said, okay, there's AI for good, there's AI for bad, right? What are the repetitive tasks that we spend our time as fact-checkers that we could hopefully get the help of technology? And a lot of that is listening for claims, the actual production, writing, a fact-check, and then you need to distribute it to put it in front of audiences who have their attention being competed for by so many other things, right? So it's a balance you strike. I spend a lot of my time doing so many repetitive tasks. Can I do this more efficiently and let my audiences know I did this using help technology, and then free myself to do actual impactful reporting, right? So it's a balance there, but it's an interesting question for sure that you raise, and it will be around for quite a while. Not sure where it all ends.
I think we need to wrap it out now. Or do you have one question to one panelist so we can wrap it up solidly?
Fantastic. I feel really glad that I now actually have maybe a little bit of a complicated question, but maybe you can answer it quickly. So I work as a freelance journalist for Deutschlandfunk and WDR, but I also, out of scientific interest, have focused on disinformation campaigns, especially in the United States lately. And so since you all have a very close eye on important parts of the world right now, I'm interested in, I have a question regarding disinformation flows and disinformation networks. Because when you look at the United States, you can see that you have some kind of disinformation super spreaders that then trickle down to large parts of the country and also internationally, like, for example, in the MAGA movement, Steve Bannon. And
so what's the question?
And I would be interested to know if maybe when you talk amongst your colleagues and also with each other, do you find that you have, I would be interested in if, are there such mega disinformation spreaders also in your region, or maybe also do they overlap and you find that the disinformation flows that you find are actually coming mostly from certain spreaders from other countries? That's my question.
Quickly, there is a lot of cross-pollination of disinformation, right? And we see a lot of it that obviously starts in the US and crosses borders very easily into our corner of the world. But we also see that it's weaponized in very different ways, and that's why we've been very keen on trying to teach audiences to understand the motives behind disinformation, right? In Africa, you have to say, okay, so what are people looking to get by being disinformers or getting disinformation ideas from the US? What is their immediate use for it? And there are people who just want to be influencers, get clout, right? There are those who are looking for change, societal change of whatever nature. There are those who see it as being very good for making money. I always say if I wasn't fighting disinformation, I would actually be a disinformation merchant myself, because it's very lucrative for a lot of African countries, because then you can make money off ads and all these eyeballs that you're able to attract with all these outrageous perspectives of life, right? But simple answer is one, we see a lot of disinformation crossing borders. A lot of outrageous things that you can see are grounded, for example, in culture wars in the US or in Europe. But then you have to understand, okay, what is that then being weaponized for in a specific African country, because all these contexts are different. So what do people want to use it to achieve? Don't know if it sort of answers. Again, I'm happy to take it offline. All right.
Yeah, just to add to Lee's answer, yes, there are disinformation networks in India, and unlike the US, where the disinformation super spreaders just use the English language, in India you have like so many different languages, and you open WhatsApp every day on family groups, you see examples of that on a daily basis. So yes, that they do copy some tactics that are used by Russian misinformation spreaders, or maybe in China or the US. You mentioned MAGA and all of those, but it is contextualized, and they also get very innovative with it within the Indian context as well. So I think it wouldn't be right to just say that this is only happening in the West. And like for instance, Maria Ressa had informed Facebook about disinformation networks and how Facebook was being weaponized in 2015, but they never took any action. And it took 2016 election for Facebook to realize that, oh, we screwed up, So I think that sometimes the West just misses out completely on trends that are happening already in global South countries. And if they would have taken, note of that, maybe they could have avoided some things in this country. And living in Germany, like I know we read about how AfD has completely exploited social media, TikTok and all of that. And I'm not surprised. And there's no point blaming social media. You have to see how AfD knew how they could exploit this platform, while other parties are just realizing it now. But if I don't know if there was like a big furor about how disinformation spreads in other global south countries. Maybe the fact that AFD is even on social media platforms would have been taken more seriously and scrutinized more seriously here. So I think sometimes, it's good to look at what's happening in other global south countries to maybe be prepared for what might come in the West.
Gesine, the final word is yours.
Yeah, thanks. As for the region I'm reporting on, I must say that the Kremlin itself is a super spreader of disinformation and propaganda. And unfortunately, one of the main target countries is Germany. And the disinformation comes not only in Russian language towards the Russian-speaking public in Germany, but also in German language to the whole public. And unfortunately, it all the time gets also in established media, in talk shows and so on. And I'm very much concerned that that our colleagues, that the German public is not aware enough of the threat that is coming from Russian disinformation, because it aims at the very basics of our democratic society, that is trust into institutions, trust into media, trust into facts. And this is very important. And I can be short and make a point now, because I can use the opportunity to make, to say something about this book being published in September, and we have one chapter exactly about this issue in German. Thanks.
Thank you very much to the three of you. I think those brought a lot of perspectives in, which is food for thought for further discussions here, over there, for the next half hour or the rest of the evening. Thanks for your interest and your questions, and stay with us, stay with Weltreporter.